How's it going, everybody? This is the Nitty Gritty. My name is Chad. With me is Leonard. We are your hosts, and it's possible that you're hearing us on a podcast. If not, that's coming soon. But if you are new to the show, we welcome you. And we just basically cover random topics that we find interesting in the world of wrestling. Sometimes we do fun, off the wall things, but hopefully you find our show entertaining, because this week we are doing our second installment of the Down and Dirty Move Breakdown series. Previously, we did a whole episode on neck breakers and all the variations. We do a tournament of sorts, and we pick what we think is the best version of that move. Right, Leonard?
Right. And that was a lot of fun. It was a little long. And I should mention that we're not going to cover every single variation of a pile driver. Oh, I let the cat out of the bag because you hadn't said what we were doing yet. We're doing pile drivers this week. And we're not going to do every single version of a pile driver that's out there. In fact, there are 3 that are not in the tournament that I am going to make mention of before we get to the final 4. But I'll save that for the in-between time.
All right. Well, that'll be interesting. And I should add that with neck breakers, it was a little different in that when you looked at the variation of the move, it was pretty obvious as to what that variation involved. With pile drivers, the explanations, the name of the pile driver, you might not, when I say what the name is, you might not right away be able to picture what move I'm talking about, because we associate pile drivers most of the time with the finisher of said character and what that said character calls it, unless it's a traditional pile driver. Mm-hmm. So we'll get more into that, and I will try to explain, if you don't know the finishing move that I associate it with right away, I'm going to try and explain the best way I can what the move actually looks like. But we are first going to talk just a little bit about the history of a pile driver. And obviously the basics of the move is when a wrestler grabs their opponent, turns them upside down, and basically drops them onto their head into the mat, either in a sitting or kneeling position. The technique, I did not know this before this episode, was supposedly innovated by Wild Bill Longson. And we're going to have a picture of him up on our YouTube portion of this show. And so obviously the name is taken from a piece of construction equipment, also called the pile driver because of its relentless impacts into a foundation of sorts. So that's kind of where the name came from. A lot of the wrestlers that have been known to use the move are Jerry Lawler, Harley Race, Paul Orndorff, The Undertaker, Kane, the Brainbusters, Buddy Rogers, and on and on. We'll mention some other names as we move on. Anything about the history, Leonard, before we move into our brackets?
Well, first of all, I want to mention 2 things about the Wikipedia page on pile drivers that we took a lot of these from. One is I love the animation at the top of the page of the stick figures performing a pile driver.
I wish they had that for everyone.
Yeah, they don't. That was the first time I saw that. And the other is that their picture for a botched pile driver is Mike Bennett. That guy just can't catch a break, unfortunately. But on the history of the pile driver, we talked about the life cycle of a move with the DDT. We talked about neck breakers. And the pile driver, like the original version of a pile driver, is about the only move I can think of that you can kind of trace back to the beginning of modern professional wrestling in the early 20th century to today. And it's still as potent, as known, as devastating as it ever was. And just the original version.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because in the previous Down and Dirty Move Breakdown, you had to say the full title. Often, like the movie Precious, based on the novel by Sapphire, you have to say the full thing.
It's trademark.
So, but yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because in the previous episode you talked about the kind of bell curve of a move, and where it kind of goes and how it kind of becomes really big, and then it kind of dwindles into just like another transition or a regular move. And the pile driver has pretty much stayed consistent. Now, it's not always a finisher. It can be, depending on who's doing it, but it's always, as you said, devastating. And we're going to get to, how dangerous it can be as we go along here. But I should add, Leonard, I forgot to tell you this before we got onto the air, but off the air, we had talked about locating wrestling themed beers, and
Oh, yes.
there was one that was released in my area called Cobra Clutch, and it came with a specially themed glass with a lot of wrestlers on it.
Oh, nice. The next installment in this series will be the Cobra Clutch.
There you go. Hey,
I think there's, well, it'd be a sleeper. It'd be a version of a sleeper, would it
see,
not?
we always say we're gonna choose something simpler, but then it ends up there's like 30 variations of it. it's like a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Anywho, we are going to get to our first bracket here, and these are not in any particular order, but well, I tried to put them in some semblance of order, but that kind of got unwieldy as I went along. So,
yeah, because I'm going to throw some shade at you here in that I think that the brackets, I think you have several of the brackets I think are really weak, and several of the brackets I think are too strong, because you've got some that I would think a Final Four are all grouped together. But I get how you're trying to group them like a similar style of neck.
Right. See, I was trying to be like, because I know what one you're talking about. There's one in particular that's really, really strong because it has a lot of the classic versions of the move.
Yeah.
But we'll get there. So our first bracket, we have the pump handle reverse pile driver. We have the sit out reverse pile driver. We have the scoop side pile driver. We have the scoop slam pile driver and the cradle pile driver. So before we get to our thoughts here, I'll just say the pump handle reverse pile driver. When they say a reverse pile driver, think along the lines of a tombstone. But in this case, it's a pump handle reverse pile driver. So obviously somebody does, like they're going to do a pump handle slam and it goes into a pile driver. CM Punk used this earlier in his career, called it the punk handle pile driver. The sit out reverse pile driver is kind of was made famous, not made famous, but one of the guys who does it, Shane Taylor, he calls it Greetings from 216. And as I said, we're going to try and put clips of these as we go along. We have the scoop side pile driver, which I have to admit I had not heard of. I've never seen done. I had to really search to find what this looks like, because even looking at the description, I was somewhat confused as to what it looked like. But it's that was made famous by Hayabusa, who called it H Thunder. The scoop slam pile driver, a lot of people should know because it's basically a Michinoku driver. Taka Michinoku did that in WWF, and a lot of other people have done that move over the years. But he was probably one of the more famous. And the cradle pile driver, which was made famous by Carl Gotch, but most people who are watching or listening to this might remember Jerry Lynn's finisher, which was a cradle pile driver. So Leonard, let's go to you. Out of those, which one do you think is the strongest?
Okay, well, the scoop side pile driver, I could not find what that looked like. So unfortunately, I've got to discount that because again, I mean, I get a sense of what it is, but I'm not very familiar with it. The Michinoku driver, of course, I'm aware of. The pump handle reverse pile driver, I'm not that aware of. I do know of it. The sit out reverse pile driver, I'm not familiar with that either. So for me, this comes down to, I like the Michinoku driver and just the old simple cradle pile driver, the best of those. You had a pump handle or a cradle or a double underhook to any move, and it just kind of like kicks it up a notch. Like it's just a little bit of extra flair to it, and I just like that. And I'm old school, as you know, and I actually thought this was a pretty one of the pretty weak brackets. I don't really like a whole lot of the ones in here. And I know most of the people out there are probably going to say, oh, Michinoku driver. But I'm going to go with the good old-fashioned cradle pile driver. That's my pick to advance from this bracket.
You know what? That's a good pick. And for me, it kind of came down to scoop slam pile driver, the Michinoku driver, and the cradle pile driver. I always liked Jerry Lynn's finisher. I thought that it always looked really devastating. Taka Michinoku, the Michinoku driver. Other people do it now, and it looks devastating as well. Some of these other ones, I think, Leonard, when I looked at the names and now thinking about it as we're talking about it, it's almost like they wanted to do something right before a pile driver that kind of made it look a little bit quicker, maybe a little bit smoother or a little bit nicer. to the eye, like, you know, I'm going to do this pump handle and then quick go into a pile driver. It kind of makes for better visual in a way, like a more modern visual, maybe. I don't know. I could be just
Yeah,
talking
I
right
think
out of my ass.
yeah, well, a lot of the different variations that we're talking about, it's either the setup is different or the body positioning is different. I mean, that's pretty
Right.
much how you get variation. But a lot of these is this the setup is whatever, and then it just turns into a pile driver. And pretty much you only do that because it looks cool. You only do it
Right. Yeah.
because you're
Looks cool.
trying to add something to it. Like you said, you know, you're trying to make it look different or neat or whatever. So yeah, I definitely get that. So, you know, again, so trying to do something like that, I understand it. I think it's needless to a large extent.
Yeah, and you know, so my pick to advance, it came. I was going back and forth in my head, but I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go with you on this one. I'm gonna go with Cradle
Okay.
Piledriver to advance, and so that'll be moving on.
Okay.
Our next bracket is one of my favorites because these are all the versions of the move, pretty much all the versions of the move that are really you don't see ever. Like, um,
A lot of
so
them.
let's start with the Argentine Piledriver. Number 2 is the double underhook back-to-back pile driver. We have the flip pile driver, the double underhook pile driver, the vertical suplex pile driver, and the cross arm pile driver. So the Argentine pile driver, this is another one that it took me a little bit to find what this looks like, but basically you get him into an Argentine backbreaker type position and you flip him over for a pile driver. So you really got to trust the person doing that to you. It's called a psycho driver. Number one, that's a lot of people would know it as that. The double underhook back to back pile driver. So this is the version of the move that you will never see in wrestling, hardly ever, because
Yep.
it's probably the most dangerous variation of the move. And if we all agree that the pile driver in general is dangerous, this is about as dangerous as it gets. People might remember Shane Helms doing the Verde Breaker.
Yeah.
One of the famous versions that I saw in my research was the Kudomi Valentine, apparently. But yeah, so this is basically they're back to back, and the person's getting dropped right on their head. So we'll get more into that one. The flip pile driver has become probably the most famous version of this move now, I would say, because you see it. If you go a week without seeing this, then you're not watching enough wrestling. It's basically the Canadian Destroyer is what
Yeah.
most people look at it as, or the Destroyer just alone. So after that, you have the double underhook pile driver, which is the Tiger Driver 98. Mitsuhara Misawa was probably the most famous guy to do this one. Always looked devastating. The vertical suplex pile driver, again, this is one you can see on TV right now. Brian Cage calls it the drill claw. He just won a match with that last week, actually. And one that I had not seen before, the cross arm pile driver. That has been made famous by a guy named Show, who calls it the shock arrow, and a guy who I've never heard of, Rick Blade, who calls it the edge of the blade. So basically, in case you weren't aware, the cross arm pile driver, basically the guy's arms are crossed between his legs, and you kind of flip him over in a way to give him a pile driver. But Leonard, I'm going to throw it back to you again here.
Okay.
Out of those, which is your favorite?
Okay. Well, there's a lot of strong ones in here. The Argentine pile driver, as you mentioned, is probably best known as the Psycho Driver by Super Dragon. The setup is similar to that of an Argentine neck breaker that we talked about in that video. You know, it looks done. It looks good if done smoothly. A lot of these variations that we talked about are just about a different starting position before going into the move. This is one of those. The double underhook pile driver you mentioned, that's known as the Tiger Driver 98. And as I said, I'm a sucker for anything with a pump handle with a double underhook. It's another one of those variations where it's all about the starting position, and it's all about just doing something slightly different to add something into it. It's the way it's treated, but the Tiger Driver 98 is considered one of those, I think, super devastating moves and something that a technical guy would use.
Right.
This, I kind of, a regular pile driver, I kind of associate with like big burly dudes. A Tiger Driver 98 with like the kind of late 90s cruiserweights. Like I would see them doing this kind of thing. The Verde Breaker, as you mentioned, very probably most well known by being done by Shane Helms. There's something about it, and maybe it's how Helms does it. But you know, I like his version a lot. As you mentioned, it's very dangerous. It's something that like an outlaw mud show guy should not be doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's something that I think if you have a trained guy like Shane Helms, because here's the toughest part of that is that when you get the guy behind you, you don't know how he's positioned when he gets back there. Because
Right.
watching videos, I see guys, they would, when they would get in position, they would then lift their head. So instead of taking it on their head, they're taking it on the upper part of their back, which is
Right.
where you should take that bump. And so, but if when you're Helms or whoever, and you got him flip back there, one, if you snap it too quick, he's going to take it on his head. But if you wait too long, it's going to look bad
Right.
because you're just holding it, standing there. So again, I think that should be an asterisk only if performed by Shane Helms or, you know, Hurricane Helms. The Canadian Destroyer is one of those other ones that I don't think I want an outlaw mud showed guy doing.
Yeah.
It's a flippy move for the sake of doing it. Again, PD Williams totally nails it. Looks great. Looks smooth. Is absolutely awesome. He hits it clean and with such speed and such a snap. But again, that's another move where I think only certain guys should do it because they can pull
Adam
it off.
Cole does it a lot too on TV.
Yeah.
These days.
Yeah, and I think he does a good version of it. Now, the vertical suplex Piledriver I know best is the Steiner screwdriver by Scott Steiner.
Yes.
And
yes, you're right.
yeah, so this, I mean, Steiner, man, back in the day, like early to mid 90s, was
Yep.
just amazing. So
He
innovative
was.
and so crazy and just so strong. Because again, and Brian Cage does this too. The trick to that is when you lift the guy into vertical suplex, is to just to hold them there for like a week
Yeah.
and then pull them down and into the move. And you know, it looks, I think Cage's is good. I prefer Steiner's, you know, from back in the day. But it looks awesome. It looks really cool. And then what was the last one on the list?
Cross
There's a
arm.
cross arm, which I'm not that really that familiar with. So you know, I really can't talk a whole lot about that. For me, I would go my top two favorites here would be the Tiger Driver 98 or the Steiner Screwdriver, aka Drill Claw. Would be my two favorites here. And again, I think it's gets the raw power versus, you know, maybe something that's more of a technical cruiserweight move. And just because I think it just looks so impressive, I'm going to go with the vertical suplex Piledriver as my choice to advance.
Ooh, interesting. So yeah, I should have added that this is the only category we have here that has 6 entries on it. But yeah, like moves like the cross arm pile driver and the Verde Breaker, the back double underhook back to back. Like those are ones like you have these other pile drivers that go into position really quickly and it's designed to be really fast. And then you have ones like that, which are really tough to get on in a quick way because like they take a lot of steps. Like the guy's arms have to be crossed and you have to flip him and it's, you know, and the back to back one, like you have to get that into position in a smooth way without it looking too forced. Because as you said, there's very easy ways to make that one look bad or to have it go badly. So as much as I love the Verde Breaker, it's not been perfected and it probably never will be because, you know, we want people to be able to walk, but you know, not enough people do it to really make it look smooth enough. But yeah, the vertical suplex one is interesting. That's one that you really just want to show off your power with. That's not meant to look like flashy necessarily, apart from just, you know, look at how strong I am. But this is one where I differ from you. I'm going to have to go with the Tiger Driver 98 because seeing that for the first time when I got into Japanese wrestling, it was Misawa. And I mean, gosh, like watching these guys dump people on their heads as much as they were was like such a shocking thing to see for somebody who grew up in the Hogan era. So I'm going to go with that one. So we have 2 advancing here.
Well, you know what? I'll tell you what, I'll make it simple. Since that was my number 2, I'll flip my vote. I'll go Tiger Driver 98, and we can just advance that by itself.
All right, so we're doing a Siskel and Ebert reverse of the thumb.
Yes.
There. All right. So our next bracket, back to 5, we have the Backflip Piledriver. We have the Back to Belly Piledriver. We have the Over the Shoulder Back to Belly Piledriver. We have the Pump Handle Back to Belly Piledriver, and the Wheelbarrow Piledriver. So the Backflip Piledriver was made famous by Manami Toyota. She calls it the Victory Star Drop. And if you have not seen this move, like this is another one like the Verde Breaker that if you do not trust the person doing it to you, it looks wicked. It really does. I mean, hers was done from the top rope, I should add. So that's the clip that I saw. And, so that's a really cool one. Back to Belly, you might know it as the Deadeye or the Beach Break, Adam Page and Hangman Adam Page, I should say, and Orange Cassidy both do a version of this in AEW right now. The Over the Shoulder Back to Belly Piledriver. So this is the part, Leonard, where I got to say I did not expect to see this on here. And when I saw it, I was like, wow, this is considered a piledriver. Most people would know it as White Noise that Sheamus does all the time. And a lot of other people do the move too. And I didn't think of this as a piledriver.
No, I would, if I had to call it something, I would probably call it like a head cradle Samoan drop.
Right. Like a backbreaker type thing.
Yeah, because you've got the guy slung across your back and you've got the head cradled on this side. And then you kind of either fall back or kind of fall to the side with it. I found a video, I think it was like 42 of the greatest piledrivers of all time. And a lot of them were like slams. They look like more like mat slams than me. And I like this move. Finley did it as well as the Celtic Cross. A lot of other guys do it. I think it's a cool move. Again, it's one of those I would debate, is it really a piledriver or is it more like a fireman's carry slam or something
right, because I think that they intend it to be on the head, but like when they do it, obviously they're aiming for the person's back more because they don't want to kill the guy. So yeah, it's kind of all what you perceive there. The Pump Handle Back to Belly Piledriver, again, it really does look nice. That's the Psycho Driver 2, in case anybody was wondering. There's compilations out there of all 4 variations of the Psycho Driver. The Wheelbarrow Piledriver, I got to admit, Leonard, I could not find a clip of this.
Nope, and I didn't either. I get the sense of what it is. It's similar to a wheelbarrow face buster, but instead of going flat, they would go up and down.
Right.
Would be my guess.
So what's your pick here, Leonard?
Oh, this
is a weaker bracket for sure, right?
This is another weaker one for me. As much as I said I do like the White Noise, I find kind of hard to push that through. As we both said, I don't know if I would call that a back break or a neck breaker. Or see, I don't know what we're calling it. We're calling it a piledriver. Like I don't think either one of us said we would call it that. Some of these, again, the wheelbarrow I'm not very familiar with. The backflip piledriver I'm not very familiar with. So I think this kind of comes down to the back to belly and the pump handle for me. Yeah, this is a tough one.
Well, while you're thinking, let me give you my pick because I know mine.
Okay, and that might sway me.
So yeah, this category, like I don't really know why I compiled this the way I did, but anyway, I would probably go with the back to belly piledriver here. Apart from the Verde Breaker, this is a way to do a piledriver with your back that makes it really still look devastating, but you can still protect the guy to a certain degree. And you see, as I mentioned, you see some guys do this nowadays because in AEW they don't have nearly as many moves banned as WWE does. So I'm going to go with the back to belly piledriver here.
Well, that and the pump handle were my 2 favorites that I liked here. And since I went with the cradle earlier, I'll go with the back to belly this time. So we can continue to advance 1 per category. So there you go.
All right. So our last bracket, well, not really our last. We're going to talk about some others, but the last bracket I have here is probably the most stacked. And I know this is going to be tough for you, Leonard.
This could be the fine. There's probably I can make a final four out of these, but
so
let's go.
We have the traditional pile driver, which is a belly to back pile driver. We have the kneeling belly to back pile driver. We have the jumping pile driver, the reverse pile driver, and the kneeling reverse pile driver. So the traditional pile driver, we talked at the top about all the guys who do that. Jerry Lawler, Harley Race, many others. You see that move a lot. But again, you have to really trust the guy to do it correctly. Mick Foley did it in unique version of it as well. The kneeling belly to back pile driver, I feel like you don't see nearly as much. If somebody's going to do this, you really see it done the traditional way. The jumping pile driver you will see every now and then, but again, it's you got to have a trustworthy, a really knowledgeable guy in the ring. The reverse pile driver is not what the kneeling reverse pile driver is the Tombstone. That's the one everybody knows. But the reverse pile driver is something you don't see very often, and there's a reason why, and that's because that is the move that really shortened Steve Austin's career when Owen Hart did that to him at SummerSlam. He landed right on his butt, and that was a big moment in wrestling, big moment for Steve Austin. So this is a big category here, Leonard. What do you think?
Well, to talk about the reverse pile driver for tonight, I watched a lot of clips of people talking about that incident between Steve Austin and Owen Hart, including Stephen Owen and Jim Cornette and Jim Ross and Bruce Pritchard. And everyone seems to have a little bit of a different memory or a different take on it.
Yeah.
And I would agree with I would believe most what Steve's recollection was that he and Owen were talking out the match, and he suggested doing a Tombstone pile driver as a near finish for Owen. And as they were discussing it, and he's like, so then you go to your knees, and Owen goes, no, I go on my ass. And he goes, no, it's Tombstone. You go on your knees. He's like, no, I got this. You go to my ass. And Steve thought, one, he was either ribbing him because Owen was famous for that, or, well, this is just maybe a different version he knows. That, he's brother of Bret Hart, son of Stu Hart. He's very well trained. He knows what he's doing. And from what Jim Cornette said, that was not a move he really remembers Owen doing. And was thinking maybe it was something he was comfortable with, and maybe it was something that Steve suggested, and he didn't want to think, I don't want Steve to know I don't know how to do this or whatever, and went along with it. So I don't think he intentionally hurt Steve Austin, but I think he did probably do a move that he wasn't comfortable with, which really speaks to, again, what we're saying, you have to have the right people do these moves. And that was really the start, at least in WWE.
I have a story to add to this.
Okay, sort of the downfall of the pile driver, where they started to ban different versions of it. But go ahead.
In watching matches recently, watching different pay-per-views, I did come across a pay-per-view. I forget what it is now. I should have written it down earlier than what happened at SummerSlam with Owen, where he does this move, but he goes to his knees.
Okay.
And then in the Austin match, he went to his ass. So make of that what you will. I agree with you. I don't think anybody was intentionally trying to hurt him here, but it's weird. You wonder if it was like a miscommunication of some sort, but it is weird to see. It was weird. I noticed it because, the clip of Austin and Owen so well that when I saw him do the move to, I forget who it was too, and go to his knees, I was like, wow, that's weird. Why would he have gone to his knees there and not with Austin? But anyway.
Yeah. The kneeling belly to back pile driver, I know Dynamite Kid used to do. And actually, I have mentioned I'm doing a long-term fantasy fed with known wrestlers, and Dynamite Kid is my cruiserweight champion currently, and I have him using that as his finisher because I thought it was a good one for him. The jumping pile driver, again, it's just a traditional one, but instead of falling down, you're jumping, adding a little more danger to it. But for me, this category certainly comes down to the traditional pile driver and the Tombstone pile driver. So, we talked about the traditional pile driver, and there's just so many classic guys who used it, and there's classic moments involving it, like Jerry Lawler putting Andy Kaufman in the neck brace, Terry Funk power driving Ric Flair on a table that doesn't break at WrestleWar 89. It's just an amazing history and an amazing legacy to it that we've talked about. This is, if there wasn't this move, then there wouldn't be all the other ones we're talking about. Now the Tombstone I thought was interesting because I learned just this year on Jim Cornette's podcast that the Tombstone Piledriver, the name of it, existed prior to Undertaker, and I knew the move did. But calling it a Tombstone Piledriver, I thought was something they did for Undertaker. But apparently, this traces all the way back to Karl Gotch, another one that he invented and perfected. And that if the idea was that you're driving a guy straight down into the mat like a gravedigger planting a tombstone straight down, and it's kind of the end for you, the end of the match. So that it was already called a Tombstone Piledriver. So to have a move that pre-exists with that name, and then you tie it to this gimmick that is the Undertaker, I don't think you have a better marriage of a move and a gimmick, putting together that didn't already, exist.
Very true.
And of course, Kane used it to a lesser extent. It's a perfect match for this gimmick. It's something in the way that they do it. It looks great. It looks cool. It has a great setup because when they get the guy in position, the whole crowd is ready for it. It's almost a certain finish. I mean, I've seen matches where the Undertaker has hit 3 choke slams and 4 last rides and had a guy in the Hell's Gate for 10 minutes, and then he hits the tombstone and it's over at that point,
Right.
So again, the traditional and the tombstone, this is where it comes down to for me. And as much for me, it's 1 and 1A if we're talking Piledrivers, but I gotta go traditional because it's traditional and it has such a legacy and such a history. And sure, the tombstone does too, but it's pretty much tied directly to 2 specific guys only for the past 30 years, where the Piledriver is a bunch of different guys, legendary moments over the past 100 years.
Right. And I agree with you here. The traditional is probably the best, definitely the best version of this bracket. The kneeling reverse, obviously the tombstone is really devastating, but like you said, it's tied to that one character. And Kane to a lesser extent, but he would go on to really use a choke slam more than often than not. But the kneeling back, belly to back, and the reverse pile driver in general, those are versions of the move. Again, even though we listed people that do them, you really don't see those very often because at least the reverse has a bad connotation to it, even if somebody can do it correctly. I don't know why the traditional one with just the kneeling, I don't know why that's not done more. Because I almost feel like that could be safer if you do it correctly, but you don't see that. So I'm going to go.
The only thing I was thinking of is that you would see the guy's face who is taking it more.
Oh yeah.
And I don't know if that would be if he's selling it or not selling it right and he's upside down. I don't know. That's the only thing I could think of with that, because I was thinking that too. Why wouldn't you do that one? And that's the only thing I could think of is that the guy's face would be more visible.
Right. Well, before we get on to our semifinals, I put the aided Piledriver in its own category because I really don't know if it deserves to be ranked with some of these others because they're done by single wrestlers as opposed to the aided Piledriver, which is a tag team. I associate it more with the Brain Busters than anybody else. Right. But it was cool when they did it. What do you think, Leonard?
Yeah, well, there's 2 different versions there where you're just driving the guy's feet from the mat, and then how the Brain Busters would do it, where you come off the second turnbuckle or you come off the top and you're driving the guy's feet down. I think it's a great tag team finisher, and it's because it looks so devastating. You're taking this devastating move and you're adding this extra element that makes it more so, because the idea is, you're adding more impact, more force, because you got the guy pushing. So right. That's why that one looked great. And then before we go on, there are 3 that I wanted to mention that weren't part of the list. You briefly mentioned Mick Foley, who does the pulling Piledriver, which where he grabs a guy's tights and falls back. I always thought that was because he wasn't strong enough to lift the guy. And, Mick's great and nothing against him, but I think it looks sloppy and amateurish. I'm lazy and I'm not going to pick this guy up. so I don't like that version. Adam Cole does a assisted rope pile driver, which is convoluted
True.
because you
You're
have a
right.
guy coming back from the outside and he has to get tripped up in the ropes like a dumbass. So Adam can run over and then pull him through the ropes with a pile driver.
Yeah.
It just looks really bad. And then the other one that I ran across that I liked was Don Morocco's one arm tombstone. That he has a guy up in his right arm, kind of slung over the right shoulder, and he's just like standing there, like reading the newspaper and eating a sandwich, which Don Morocco has eaten a sandwich live in a match before. And just again, it's another move to show how powerful you are, like the
Right.
vertical suplex Piledriver. And then he just drops down to a tombstone, and it looks cool as hell. I remember him using the running power slam as a finisher in the WWF, but I did find some clips of him doing this on jobbers. So I'm not sure exactly when he used this, but it looks great. And I would say it's probably in my top 5 favorites because of just how cool I think it looks with
Very
him doing
interesting. See, I've never
it.
seen
A guy like Keith
Look up
Lee, a guy like Keith Lee should do this move. I think Keith Lee would be awesome doing
No,
this.
I agree. And I feel like, see, I kept thinking about Keith Lee as I was doing these brackets because I think he does something along the lines of like the scoop slant, the scoop side pile driver.
Mhm.
He does something, but it's been a while since I've seen one of his matches. But anyway, let's get to our semifinals here.
Yep.
We have the Cradle Piledriver versus the double underhook Piledriver, aka the Tiger Driver 98.
Mhm.
As much as I love Jerry Lynn, I'm going with Tiger Driver 98 here, Leonard. What do you think?
Oh, yeah, I like both of those a lot. As I said before, I think the double underhook or the Tiger Driver 98 is the type of move that you associate with the cruiserweights of the late 90s. It feels like a techie dude pile driver or a flippy dude pile driver. So the fact that it's more associated with the lighter wrestlers, I like that. I'm gonna go with that. I'll go with the Tiger Driver 98 going to the final.
All right. I like that term, flippy dude.
Flippy dude. I
All
used
right,
that once before, and you said that was a Leonardism, so I wanted to bring it back.
That's, hey, I appreciate that.
Mhm.
Next match, we have back to belly pile driver and the traditional pile driver. I think that this one is pretty obvious.
Yep.
The traditional pile driver will probably move on here, Leonard, right?
Yes, without a question. No debate.
All right. So in the finals, again, I think we know what's going to come to pass here, but we have Tiger Driver 98 against the traditional pile driver. The traditional is still the best, in my opinion, because there's only so many people that can do the Tiger Driver 98 and make it look good and protect the talent. The traditional pile driver has so much legacy and history to it. It still looks devastating. It's one of those moves that has been done for ages, but it still has that wow factor. Like, oh man, he did a pile driver to him. That could potentially be the end of the match, right, Leonard?
Oh yeah, definitely so. I mean, everything we talked about, no need to reiterate it. Again, the Tiger Driver is a cool move, and there's a lot of guys who I don't think could do that move who do a traditional pile driver because of how big they are or what have you. But the traditional pile driver, again, the legacy of it and everything that we talked about. When we did neck breakers, did we go with the traditional neck breaker as the winner?
I think we went with the Rude Awakening.
There we go. Okay, so that's is that the Hangman's?
Yes.
Okay, so kind of so like the set out and the Hangmans are very traditional. So anyway, it seems like we're traditionalists, but there's a reason why these traditional moves have the legacy and lives that they have. So I'm again very happy with the traditional pile driver winning out here. Although I would call the Tombstone my 1A in this. So if we ever have like a wild card, if we do the whole massive best moves ever and there's a wild card that is needed, I would advocate the Tombstone coming in as a wild card.
Yeah, and thinking about these brackets, think about it this way. I mean, we do it, we have fun doing it, but think about it in this way. If all of the variations of this move were outlawed except one, what one would you want to see performed in wrestling matches? And I think, at least that's the way I look at it. That's why we've gone with some of the versions that we've gone with, because if I were to pick one, I would pick the Hangman's Neck Breaker. I would pick the traditional pile driver. And on an added note, the Canadian Destroyer is probably the closest thing to a transition move that the pile driver has ever become.
Yeah.
I mean, it still looks devastating, but that move is becoming more and more so prevalent that it
Yeah.
really is almost like I mean, it's still a wow moment in the match, but it's never a pinfall anymore. Never.
Yeah. Well, the thing that reminded me of another pile driver we didn't talk about, which was the Cradle Piledriver.
You mean the
Which
Jerry Lynn one?
not Cradle, not Cradle. We talked about that. I meant Package Piledriver.
Yes, you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, Kevin Owens does that because when you said that right now seems like the trendy pile driver to use is the Package Piledriver.
Yeah.
You see that in a lot more indie shows and such, and I think that's a cool version the way Owens does it, because that's a move because you're compacting the guy. I think you're lifting him higher, so the head is going to be higher.
Right.
Protect the head more when you go down. So I think that's a move where at one point you can look at it and say, oh, that's a little needless on the setup. I think there's more of a safety cushion in there by lifting the head higher. So yeah, that was another one that I think was on the initial list I had, and that's why I forgot about it. But when you said everyone doing the Canadian Destroyer, I think everyone's doing a Package Piledriver now as well. But that's a good version.
No, absolutely. Yeah, Kevin Owens is always one to try new things and to kind of bring other moves out of the woodwork. Like his finisher now is a stunner, and like you said, he does the Package Piledriver. So he has a good move set. I'll just say that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that is our down and dirty breakdown of the Piledriver. Let us know what you think. What is your favorite version of the move? And for Leonard, my name is Chad, and we will see you next week.